Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Gina Astorini, and I am the Associate Director of the Leadership Alliance. Welcome to Week 2 of the 2023 Virtual Professional Development Series and today's workshop on finding your scholarly identity. A common scenario that students find during their first week of research or working in their lab is that the project does not exactly align with how they envision the research, matching their interest or objectives. But it is important to recall that faculty and mentors have reviewed your application, including your research interests, and have determined that you are a good fit. Your contribution, perspective, and reflection will be part of developing your scholarly identity. Have you ever wondered how researchers come to be in a particular field and how they decide what research to pursue? What if you have multiple interests and are trying to decide in which direction to go? During this session, we will hear from early career researchers in different disciplines about how they found their scholarly identity and came to be in their current field of research. We are so fortunate. Our moderator today is Dr. Kristin Webster, Assistant Director of Training and Development in the Carney Institute for Brain Science at Brown University. She holds a PhD in neuroscience and did her postdoc at the Medical Research Council Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge, United Kingdom. Thank you, Dr. Webster, for moderating today's workshop. Now, over to you to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Astorini, for the warm welcome. I am delighted that we get to spend some time today discussing how we find and develop our scholarly identities. The research institute I work for is affiliated with 8 different graduate programs. So students frequently come to me and say, I'm interested in studying the brain. Now what? How do I do that? As early career scholars with broad and often interdisciplinary interests, it can be a challenge to navigate developing a scholarly identity, which is why we have invited 3 wonderful and talented early career scholars today to share their experiences with you. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Julian Culver, who came to Brown from Rice University with a PhD in sociology. He is currently a postdoc in the Department of Sociology at Brown University, and his research focuses on racial attitudes, racism, religion, and social psychology. We also have Dr. Kiara Lee, who came to Brown from the University of Pittsburgh with a BS in bioengineering. At Brown, she completed a PhD in biomedical engineering, as well as an MS in global public health. For her PhD, her research focused on point-of-care device development for blood-based diagnostics, and her master's is in the Association of Discrimination and Pre-Eclampsia Diagnosis. And we also have Ayan Waite, who came to Brown with a BS in biomedical engineering from Boston University. Here at Brown, she's a PhD student in electrical and computer engineering, and her research focuses on control systems engineering and machine learning applications in visuomotor information processing. So I've got a wonderful list of questions, many of which were submitted by the students already. And so I'm going to throw out a couple questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, as you feel compelled. I don't necessarily need to go in a certain order. I think we're going to have a really fun conversation. So unsurprisingly, the first question is, can you please share how you think about your scholarly identity? As academics, how do you identify?
I guess I don't mind starting. Hi to everyone. As Kristin mentioned, my name is Julian Culver, postdoc here at Brown University in the Department of Sociology. So I think this is a really interesting question because a scholarly identity, like any identity, is really multifaceted. It's a product of your experiences, your training, your own interest, whatever it may be. And so that all factors into how we construct our scholarly identity and even our personal identity as well. I think the tendency tendency is for people to believe that identity is something that's negotiated in isolation and by yourself, sort of at the individual level. But as I mentioned, it's multifaceted in the sense that many different components lead to how it is constructed and sort of how you navigate yourself going forward within that identity. So for me, as a sociologist and more kind of like a sociological social psychologist, I tend to think of my scholarly identity along those dimensions, my training, mentoring experiences, and even my research interests as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ayan, and I guess in a scholarly identity, there's different ways you can think of yourself. Like I personally identify more with like my training. So it's just like my training is in engineering. So I think more of myself as like a computationalist and like that type of thing. However, it's like I am also working in a neuroscience field. So it's just like I am using my engineering knowledge in like a biological application, but I guess I don't perceive myself as more of a biological person, but I guess I could be technically.
Hi, I'm Kiara. Sorry, I'm like literally in the process of moving. I'm in a U-Haul truck right now, so pardon my appearance. But yeah, for me, I think I don't know if I really like choose an identity or just kind of like say what I'm feeling in the moment, or what I'm interested in. Like other people would probably describe me as like an experimentalist because I did a lot of like wet bench experiments. So I don't like lab work, so I wouldn't identify as that personally. So I typically just think of myself of like mostly like where my interests are. So I usually would say like, oh, I'm interested in the intersection of biomedical engineering and global health, for example.
Thank you all for sharing that. I think we've touched on a couple things, how your interests drive your identity, how the methodologies and the technical training you receive drive this. And I am excited to dig deeper into all aspects of that. But before we go much further, can you share a little bit about how did you pick your graduate program? And if you're in one, your postdoc? Were you deciding between multiple options? What criteria did you use to select the most relevant programs for your interest? I know frequently this doesn't necessarily align with your undergraduate degree. Yes.
So I can say personally, so my bachelor's is in biomedical engineering, but applying to PhD programs, I decided to pick electrical and computer engineering programs just because after school, I realized it's like I wanted to study control systems, machine learning, and those type of things. And like not that biomedical doesn't, it's just that they're traditionally taught in like ECE programs. And I found it would probably be easier for me to be in those programs and just pick labs that I was interested in neuroscience. So just pick more neuroscience focused labs while being in the ECE department.
For me, the choice of the graduate institution was like different aspects. So from like an academic aspect, I was really interested in, like I said, global health. So was mostly looking at programs that had a good or an established school of public health, or had some sort of like global health certificate or something I could do at a minimum. Brown did have a master's, so that like was just like icing on the cake. And obviously getting on with like your PI and stuff like that was something I also focused on. And then in terms of like the non-academic aspect, I kind of wanted like a good community, like graduate students of color as well, which Brown definitely advertised when I was looking. And I wanted to be able to live alone on my salary. So that's something that is something that one should consider, depending on what you're looking at. And I think that's mostly generally what I was looking for, but yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, in choosing the postdoc, I really was sort of juggling between two options, whether I wanted to accept tenure track positions or do a postdoc. And then the other idea was to go industry like some of my colleagues had. And I think just because the job market experience or the job market experience was kind of rough in a sense that, I'm hearing back from institutions about I got the position and then finding out on social media that I didn't. Sort of things like that just made for a really interesting experience that sort of led me to be a little bit ambivalent about the whole process. And so for me, taking the postdoc here at Brown was a sort of a way for me to sort of think through retrospectively about my experiences for the past 6 years in graduate school, but also to take some time to think about where it is I want to go next. And thankfully, my supervising professor here, Sandra Barnes, is somebody that whose research interest overlaps with mine. So not only are we working on the research, I do sort of get that time away to think about my next move in my career trajectory, whether that be inside of academia or even outside as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Ayan, you touched on this a little bit, but can you all share a bit about how the research methodology or the tools you use to conduct your research influences your identity? Frequently, graduate programs or degrees kind of cover these broad swaths, and maybe some of the tools that we're using, or the wet lab experimentalist research experience, as Kiara mentioned, helps kind of develop that more than just kind of the name that goes on your degree.
Yeah, so it's, as I said before, I'm more interested in like computational methods and stuff like that. And I think that is like probably the focus of my identity, but also then added on to that, labs that you may not even think about do the type of work that you're interested in. So it's just like, I am still learning control theory, I'm still learning machine learning, but I'm applying it to something I find fascinating, which is the brain. So I can still consider myself a computational like engineer type person, but still apply that to the work that we're doing in my lab.
I think for me, and I don't, maybe the social sciences are, different in some respects, but given like the kinds of questions I was curious about and asking sort of dictated the methods that I used to answer those questions. And I know that's sort of like a narrow way to think about it. I mean, I still came into the process with an open mind, but the kinds of questions I was interested in answering lent itself to quantitative methods, and particularly experimental and even survey research methods as well. So based off of those experiences and those questions I was interested in, really helped sort of refine my scholarly identity at that point.
Yeah, I'd agree to what Julian said. I think for me, I was asking certain questions, and then to get those questions answered, I had to do like qualitative methods, for example, for my work that I was interested in doing, which engineers don't typically do. But it was something that I was interested in, that I was able to really do, and that's kind of how I think as a person is kind of like this interdisciplinary like mindset is like something my parents that I've always kind of had. So yeah, I think it's really just depends on like the methodologies in conclusion.
I think one of the common threads that I'm hearing from all of you is that you're really driven by your research questions, and you're kind of finding the environments and the tools and the collaborators that kind of, you're driven more by the research than feeling siloed in a specific department or maybe a specific lab. And so based on that, how important to you was it to have colleagues in your home department or program that were working on similar research, as opposed to needing to go out and seek colleagues doing similar research or using similar techniques, but maybe are in different departments or in different schools? The School of Engineering and the School of Public Health, are in very different places on our campus.
I can start just because you gave that last example, but yeah, so I sought out mentors from the School of Public Health, despite being a PhD student in engineering. That is because when I was doing my classes or some classes there, when I started thinking about like my different research questions outside of like the traditional like engineering questions, but also I kind of, what I ended up doing basically was kind of creating this team where it was like someone who, it was me, you know, as like the person leading the team. Then I had a qualitative researcher as one of my, like, helping us out with one of the projects. Had a clinical person who was expert in the clinical aspect, et cetera, people in the country I was working in. So I kind of formed this interdisciplinary team myself, and not these people didn't necessarily all work on this type of work before, but they had different expertise that I could kind of like bring together to make a cohesive project, which is exactly what I ended up doing. So I kind of sought it out. Like the engineering was important as well, so I kind of develop the questions to the people that might not have had that experimental experience, would not have known what questions to ask a person that works in a lab. So things like that. So all of it just like kind of came together.
This question is really interesting because I think it really depends on what stage in your career you're in. Particularly if you're, I'll just speak about my experience as a graduate student. I came from a very small sociology department, and there were really only 2 other faculty doing research that I could sort of see myself identifying with, and thankfully that turned out okay. But in a larger department, I would have had more opportunities to collaborate with different faculty and potentially the students who were being mentored by those faculty as well. So I think it's just, I wouldn't say one is better than the other per se. I think it just presents a set of unique circumstances and challenges based upon where you see your career going. As somebody who's sort of in the early process of their career post PhD, yeah, I think I would rather want to be in a department that has faculty doing similar or the same kinds of research that I'm interested in, just because I know how important those publications are while you're on the tenure track. It's almost, for social sciences at least, publications really are the currency, and that really helps with not just establishing your identity, but it helps grow your scholarly network, if you will, to collaborate with other faculty outside of the department, which is kind of the second part of that question. So I think collaboration in general is important. To have colleagues that can help you with that can really go a long way, whether they're inside your department or even outside.
I would say for me, having people within my home department who are working on similar stuff as me, I guess for me didn't really matter because my entire plan was to go outside of my department anyway. So, but I found it to be really good just because I felt like getting mentors in another discipline would help me learn new things, force me to think differently compared to the department I was coming from. And then also I still knew everything I wanted to learn I would end up getting out of it, just because like I find a lot that like even though someone's in this department, they can still teach you all the things they wanted to learn. They just might happen to be in like this department studying this thing. So like I went into the neuroscience department finding mentors and stuff, and like there's tons of computationalists for me to be learning from. So it was a perfect fit for me.
I'm hearing mentorship as a theme from all of you, so thank you. That is actually going to be relevant for my next question. But I'd just like to say that frequently a conversation I find I have with trainees is, who do you want your colleagues to be and who do you want your collaborators to be? I found for myself, my graduate advisor was affiliated with 3 different graduate programs. I could have done the exact same research and still been a member of 3 very different programs. And so for me, it came down to, who did I want my colleagues to be? My PhD's in neuroscience, and I knew that I would be sitting in talks that, you know, went from the molecular genetic scale all the way up through cognition. And that was what I wanted. I wanted to be around other people who cared about the brain more than I felt I needed to be around people with this kind of the same technical level, and I knew how to find when I needed those discussions. So, and I think mentors and having mentors across kind of your range of interests are so important to help you with that. And so how have you navigated advisor and mentor relationships, conducting interdisciplinary research that might be a little different or kind of on the fringe of their main kind of established research program? Sometimes it's hard when you say, faculty, your research is so interesting, but I kind of want to go over here. Please, Julian.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is a really interesting question because I just keep going back to at what stage in your sort of academic trajectory are you in? As an early graduate student, I was taking every opportunity I could get, whether it really applied to my scholarly identity or my research interest or not, just because I wanted to get the experience, but also wanted to get the exposure working with other faculty and their students. So I don't know, I wouldn't give that advice to everybody. I think if you're highly ambitious and just want to get experience, go for it. But thinking about your scholarly identity, that sort of sense of coherence and consistency with the projects that you work on, I think is going to go a long way for sure. Because if you're working on one topic, for 1 year, and then the next year you're working on something entirely different, and your identity is shifting based on those topics that you're working on or those projects that you're working on, I think onlookers would sort of look at that as you haven't firmly established your scholarly identity yet. And I think, certainly by the time you're on the tenure track as a professor, you're going to probably have this more sorted out as opposed to a first year graduate student still trying to learn the ropes of sort of that whole experience. So again, I think it's really about where you're at in this trajectory, but also having an open mind and willing to collaborate with others. But certainly later on down the road, my advice would probably be to sort of tighten that identity as best you can, not in terms of how you think about your projects, but certainly the projects that you take on, because you could sort of expand yourself so thin that you really aren't productive in many other areas that you need to be.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess I'll say for me, if I want to conduct like more interdisciplinary research, different from like maybe my PI's home program,
Or funded research.
or funded research, I found like personally with my advisor, he's really into that type of stuff. So it's a pretty easy relationship to bring up and just be talking to him about the stuff I'm interested in, and also thinking about like, oh, we need help with like this specific topic. Who's a really big, who's really into that, whose research specifically focuses on that. So I'd say I'm luckily in a environment where they really promote you doing interdisciplinary stuff. So like going to him and talking to him about it and saying like, hey, I think I can get help from so-and-so on this, from this department. He's like, oh yeah, go for it, see what happens. So yeah, I think it's just having a supportive mentor definitely helps.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, it's getting coffee, so I think it's too loud. But yeah, I'd agree that definitely the supportive mentor is very important. So in my case, I was doing something open graduate. When you get the PhD in one program and the master's in another one. And for the master's, I thought I also had to write a thesis. So that means I also had to be running a whole separate research project for my master's while I was doing my PhD. And so I started the classes in such a third year. So I had to be supportive, and I talked about this with him from the beginning, like when I was just like a prospective student. So I brought up that it was something that I was interested in. Is this something that you'd be supportive of? And he said yes at the time. And so we just like kept those conversations going up until I applied. And so that really helped. But then there was also sort of balancing act, because I'm still expected to do the PhD research at the same level as everyone else is doing it in my PhD program, while also working on this master's. So like for me, that was just a lot of work. I mean, for anyone, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, and a lot of also just like brainstorming, because there's two different ways of thinking a little bit. So like it was very tiring. But since my advisor was very supportive of me doing it, that was helpful. And I kind of do wish I had more open conversations with him about it, because I kind of just like didn't want to talk to him about it, because like it wasn't necessarily relevant to him. But I also didn't want him to like upset that I was focusing on an exam that week or something for my master's, when I should have been like in the lab doing an experiment or something like that. I mean, and then I got done, in 5 years, but I think having that open communication is like key, and just making sure they're aware of like everything that's going on. I think that's just good general advice generally, not just in terms of interdisciplinary work.
Absolutely. Open and early communication with mentors is so important for so many reasons. And before we move on to the student questions, and I'd like to encourage everyone in the audience to use the Q&A box to submit questions there as well, although I have a wonderful list that you submitted in advance. Do you struggle with finding an academic community where you feel like you fit in, or do you feel like you've got multiple academic communities? I could see where people feel like they have multiple spaces in which they fit, or I don't fit in any of the spaces that I'm running in.
I would say I definitely feel like I have like multiple different groups that I'm a part of. So I have like my cohort, my ECE cohort that I came into school with. And then, but then because of my research interests, I have now like also have this cohort of people from like neuroscience, CLIPS, and like all these different departments focused on neuroscience. So I feel like I've gotten a even bigger community that way. And because I hang out with neuroscientists like so much, I'm pretty sure one of these cohorts already adopted me as theirs, like even though I'm not technically in their program. But I feel like you just get that's the like I kind of like nice thing about it. You get to know people from like a lot of different departments. So I think I got like pretty awesome different groups of friends.
I never felt like I struggled to sort of find that sense of belonging within an academic community. I think the difficulty sometimes lies in like finding exactly what that community is. And so, sociology is this very big umbrella that includes many different sort of subfields and sort of ways of thinking within that. But, the more you get out there and the more you present at conferences and publish, you can figure out, well, who's trying to speak to you after the conferences, or who attends your presentations, or who even cites your work. And that kind of gives you a tip as to like what kind of community or group you're speaking to with your research. So I think, if you're engaged with the discipline, I think that community should find you in some way or another.
I'm thinking of this question of like if I were to go into academia, which I don't plan to as of right now, where I would like want to be housed. I guess. So that's kind of how I'll answer this question. And I think in my case, I'd prefer to be housed in the public health school, and that is because I think that a lot of people come from different backgrounds in that kind of field. People study different things and end up being in public health. And I think that on the engineering side, like some of the methodology that I'd be using and such would be a little bit too new and different to have like colleagues in that sense that would be working on something like parallel or anything to what I would do. So I think what I would look for in like in terms of like fitting in is like something that is more like a place that's like open and has like a lot of options, a lot of collaborations and stuff like that.
Maybe along those lines, as we're kind of thinking about various departmental homes and finding places where you fit in, we had a student who asked, how do you determine if a lab or PI will respect and accept your identity in a professional manner? So although we've been talking a lot specifically about a scholarly identity here, we're whole people, we bring our whole selves to our work and to our research and our experiences and our histories. So maybe can you talk a little bit about kind of how all of your identities interplay with your scholarly identity and how that fits with the colleagues that you're trying to find? Sorry, it was a long question. It was in the context of how do you find a lab or a PI to work with that accepts your identity in a professional manner?
No, that's a good question. I think we're all just thinking about how to like concisely answer this question.
We're halfway through. I'm digging into the tough questions now.
Yeah,
the students have some
question.
really wonderful questions for you all.
Yes. Sorry, 1 second. Someone else can go first.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the program, the department, and the discipline that you're in. So I can definitely speak about my experience at least. I think when I was interviewing to be in PhD programs, many of the programs that I interviewed at already paired interviewees or even incoming students with a mentor or advisor that first semester there. So there wasn't really much heavy lifting that students had to do to find a mentor. However, it was also understood that you're welcome to change your mentor or your advisor at any point during your graduate career. And I think, during those interview days are really important to sort of establish, is this someone I could see myself working with potentially for the next 4 or 5 or 6 years in my case? And you really want to invest some time into that question or into answering that question, because it can be a very rocky relationship if you're not careful. And I'm not saying that was my experience, but certainly I've heard enough stories around the discipline to where, had they taken a bit more time to be sort of introspective about where they saw their career versus where their advisor saw their career going, I think it would have made for a much smoother experience. And then also, again, I think, if we don't talk about this later, I mean, the importance of setting boundaries with your advisor early on, I really can't stress that enough. I would actually recommend doing that within the first 1 or 2 conversations you have with your advisor, just so that they know sort of the expectations going forward for the best outcome.
I can go next. So yeah, I agree with everything that Julian said. I was going to say kind of like a little bit deeper into like when you are interviewing, you can easily talk to graduate students that are in that lab, and graduate students that are not, because I mean graduate students, we talk like it's a workplace. We are friends. We know the gossip.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so like if something happened with a certain identity of a person or something, that information would probably be shared with you some way or another. So you could easily find out that way. And I think when it comes to the boundaries, I think thinking about the relationship you'd like to have with your advisor, like some people like to be besties, like we're good friends, like we talk about like this, that, and the other. I personally am not like that. Like I kind of try and keep it like strictly professional. Like if you want to like ask questions on my family, we can talk about it, but like I'm not going to offer that information up immediately, if that makes sense. So I think thinking about like what you would want out of that relationship, because I've heard of situations where that friend line does get like blurred, and then like things that are like I'll say not inappropriate but unprofessional occur, however you want to take that information. But yeah, I would just think about it like that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just going to reiterate what both of you have said. Like, definitely when you're applying to a program, whether the program is like you're directly going to a lab or it's a rotational program, whichever, make sure you talk to people there. So definitely talk to the graduate students ahead of time, ask about their experiences, see how they feel, if they feel comfortable in that environment, do they feel heard? And stuff like that. And definitely with boundaries, it's like you have to establish them early, because whatever boundaries you're not setting up early, it's like that will become like the expectation like going forward. So if you don't set it up, then they're like, well, I didn't realize this because you didn't initially like set that boundary with me or whatever. So definitely early on, like be sure to try to establish, like as best as you can, like try to establish whatever relationship that you want to have.
That absolutely makes sense. And thank you for bringing up the boundaries work. I think it's particularly important for people who are doing interdisciplinary work and might not always be in the lab. They might be somewhere else conducting their scholarship. And so it's really important. It goes back again to that point of communicating with your mentors in ways that feel good and respect those boundaries. And so while we're actually talking about boundaries, a question in the Q&A is, how often do you worry about politics within your department? Either from a scholarly perspective, I guess if there's competing research, or I guess in any other sense as well.
That's a good question. I think you shouldn't have to worry about politics as a graduate student. I'll say that as like my first thing. And I think that because I don't think graduate school should be competitive. And because like we're all doing different research, we're all working at different paces. Like you shouldn't be looking over at like, I don't know, someone else in your cohort and saying, oh, they have this many papers, like that means I'm not good enough or something like that. Like you should never tell yourself that because you're all on completely different paths. Like experiments take different time, like lengths of time, etc. So like I just don't think there should be politics in that sense, but I mean there are no matter what. So I think for me, how I approached it was like trying to just first like understand the lay of the land, like who maybe you should be avoiding, who you should be like leaning on, and definitely finding advocates outside of your department. So like let's say like you and your PI's like relationship just like goes to crap for some reason. You need to be able to have someone that you can talk to, preferably outside of your department, because you know there's politics within it. So preferably about outside of your department that you can talk to and be like, hey, I have this issue with my advisor. What should I do? Some schools like Brown have like an odd bunch person who's like supposed to be like a person that stays neutral in situations, so you could talk to them. You could talk to people in like some other offices that could be supportive, therapists, etc. So like I think, and the last thing I'll say is I think I think it's hard, but try not to like get worked up about every little thing because you can't control everything, right? So I've seen a lot of people struggle with this and like, they've been wronged in some way, which I'm not going to say like, I'm not going to minimize what they felt, but you can't fight every battle because that's just exhausting. So like try and like also consider your own energy and think about yourself and set boundaries, even with yourself on the things that you get upset about and try to change and set and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. And I'd really like to just reiterate, one of the points you made, although they were all excellent, that it's really crucial to have mentors who don't have a stake in your career, who your publication rate or the research you're pursuing won't affect their own careers. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts on politics? No. Okay, great. Well, I kind of feel like we've come full circle with this next question, but what advice would you give to young researchers who are struggling to define their scholarly identity or find their research niche in a rapidly evolving academic landscape? There were several questions that came in specifically about how did you narrow your research interest down? I'm interested in so many things. How do you know what you actually want to do in graduate school and then as you progress through your career? And it's okay if you're still figuring it out. I think we all are.
I will say like transitioning from undergrad to graduate school, I had like a 2-year period in which I was doing as a research assistant. I personally found that really helped because at the end of college, I was just like, okay, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, but not exactly. So I feel like that time really helped me narrow down like more exactly what I wanted to do. But I also think you kind of have to be open a little bit to like maybe disciplines or experiences like that you wouldn't have thought of. So like how I like to think of it was just more like, what are the things I want to learn and how that happens, I can be very flexible about. Like now I am in a lab that studies like visual processing in monkeys. Like, did I imagine I was going to do that in undergrad? Absolutely not. But like, I knew like the topics that specifically that I wanted to study. So I was just like, okay, let me be flexible in how like that research exactly comes about. So I think being willing to experience new things and be in subfields that like you may have not thought about or had any experience in, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just kind of go back to what I said in the opening, that, your scholarly identity, like any identity, is multifaceted and, it's not constructed in isolation. It's something that's oftentimes negotiated socially and externally. So, with that being said, like we have to understand that it's a process. I don't think at least in my experience, I don't think I'm ever going to get to a point where I feel like I'm firmly one thing, because I might learn something else and I might be interested in that and want to find, creative ways to sort of intertwine my research with that new thing that I found out. So, yeah, I think, my best advice would be just to give yourself some time, but also be open to new experiences and opportunities and research methods that can help you answer an array of questions that you may be interested in.
Thank you for reminding us that this is an evolution, and that as we gain more experience and new techniques and we learn new things, that the way we think about our research and our relationship to it absolutely can change. So thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah, I think adding on to something Julian said like earlier, I think for me, I just first followed like questions that were interesting to me. So like when I was looking for PhD programs, I was just interested in like diagnostics in general, which like sounds like specific, but it's really not. There's a lot of different types. Like I could be doing like neuro something, or I could be doing something else. So I knew I liked like diagnostics. So I was like, okay, I'll just like look up labs that do that. Found one that I liked, and then from there, narrowed down just based on projects that I took on that were interesting to me. And I think also, like Ayan said, being open to taking on those projects, and also partially part of it I think is also just like life and like where you're at in when certain opportunities pop up. So like for example, like I was offered projects later in my PhD, like in my 4th year, that I was like, I can't do that because like I don't want to start a whole new project with a whole new technique. But if I had done that, I would have changed the entire course of like my interest. And I wouldn't have worked on this thing. I would have worked on something else. And so I think part of it's also just like what happens to be happening at the time and the situation. So
How do you think a scholar's identity influences their research opportunities? Julian, it specifically jumped out for you from your bio, because you say you do psychology research in a sociology department. Do you feel like your degrees or your graduate programs kind of get in the way sometimes for the kind of research? Do you feel like a specific discipline or title, influences the research opportunities you're eligible for or that find you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think during my graduate experience at Rice, I kind of lucked out because my advisor also identified as a social psychologist, but in a sociology department. So obviously that kind of explains how I ended up at Rice too, just given that congruence with our research interests. So, but I do know that whatever identity that we sort of promote and brand ourselves with, that does sort of, I don't know if dictate's a strong word, but it basically, it lends itself to certain opportunities and collaborations with people who may be doing the same research as you or sort of have that same identity. And so you would have to think that for those who do not have that identity or do not study or are not studying that same sort of research topic, that maybe they're less willing to collaborate, as an academic, or even, maybe they won't even read your research, unfortunately. But nonetheless, like going back to what we talked about with community, at least, I think, again, that identity really is important to sort of finding different communities to collaborate with and be mentored by, and even mentor students who are coming up after you, sort of as a way to pay it forward. So yeah, I think it really is consequential to many different things in academia. And, I think as soon as you sort of have a solid understanding of what your identity may be, I think it would be a good time to sort of start promoting yourself and branding yourself as such going forward.
I really like how you phrase that, branding and promoting. It really is a self-identity. It's not necessarily what your degree is or your department is. It's how you choose to introduce your research and the way that you approach it. So thank you for that.
to answer a little bit about like if your degree hinders your, I forgot what the rest of the question, but
how does it affect your research opportunities?
Oh, opportunity, that's what it was. Yeah, so I am doing a postdoc starting in July, so I'll be going to Peru to do that. Hence why I'm moving.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so it's a year long, but in global health work is the focus. And so having my biomedical engineering degree was actually a huge asset because it's through the NIH. And if you don't know, the NIH has different institutes. And so now for the first time, the Biomedical Engineering Institute is funding this program because of me. So like that, having that engineering degree and having that like a little bit of a different of a discipline was actually something that was helpful. So I think, I don't know, I always think it's helpful. Sometimes it can be a hindrance, but I've never found it a hindrance so far.
Sounds like it went back to branding and how you promoted yourself and your skill set.
Yeah, I will say I've never found my like scholarly identity to be a hindrance in the like research opportunities. I feel like, especially depending on your environment, like Carney, especially, like it's so interdisciplinary. Like they have people from like literally every department. So I feel like me coming in being like, oh, I'm from this different department. People are like, oh, that's cool. How can we use this? How is this like going to be helpful? Like I feel like they're more like, ooh, you have expertise in this, or you are interested in this. How can we use that? How can we like move forward? Or like, oh, you'd be perfect for this project. So I feel like it's only, I don't see how it has hurt me in any way.
Well, thank you for the plug, but I will encourage people to seek out the interdisciplinary research institutes. The one I'm in is purposefully built to bring together everyone who cares about this one topic. It's to get people from different disciplines in the same room, exactly as you said. And so that's certainly not unique to our approach. So at your institutions, ask, you know, where is the interdisciplinary research happening? Is it a center? Is it an institute? So that's really wonderful advice. Thank you. A couple more questions. I think we still got time for a few more. As you acquire more knowledge and praxis, how have you been able to bring the communities and identities that you came in with into the scholarly work and support the implementation of practices that will positively impact the communities that you're from? So back to integrating our scholarly identity with all of our other identities that we bring with us to research.
I think the most direct example for me was my master's thesis work, which was in racial disparities in preeclampsia. And preeclampsia is a condition during pregnancy that affects Black women at a higher rate. So that's just like an obvious direct connection. So being able to do that work and write about it in a way that it has not been written about typically. I know Julian probably knows exactly what I mean by this, since your work is also in racial disparities. But basically, what I'm saying is like usually like it's written in a way that, oh, Black women are like obese, they're this, that, and the other, like negative words that like are written. And instead, I was kind of writing about it in a positive light and kind of talking about how it's really about the social aspect and not necessarily the biological aspect. And so being able to write about it in that way, I think is like a big deal, and like definitely will add like a different discourse to the field that when it's typically like discussed in, I don't know, I would say a negative connotation. So that's like kind of like the most direct way I could think about it. But I think in general, I always tend to write in a way that's respectful to different communities. So like instead of writing like I don't know, poor or something like that, I would write like low income, like trying to like really be careful about my language is basically what I'm trying to say. Because I don't think that's necessarily done a lot. I mean, it's getting better, but I think it's something that can be worked on. I think it's something that's important.
Absolutely.
Well, I can kind of piggyback off that as well, because I think that's an excellent point. I think with a lot of social science research, at least, when researchers are studying communities of color, they do tend to sort of start from this sort of socially deficient model and sort of build off of that, which is problematic in many ways. And it's not to say they should ignore the sort of plight of certain communities and inequalities, but nonetheless, I mean, there still is different ways of viewing those experiences that doesn't necessarily, I don't know, look at one community as being deficient versus another. So yeah, I think that is something I try to implement in my work, just given my experiences. And sometimes I'm not always successful at doing that, but I do try to at least always have that on my mind when conducting research, and definitely when I'm writing the manuscript for publication.
Great, thank you. We talked about having multiple academic communities, so you're kind of running in a couple of different circles. And we had a student ask, how do you maneuver in a room with people that you feel are more qualified than you? I'm not sure if they meant specifically in academic disciplines that are kind of, or if they meant purely in an imposter syndrome sense. I know that they're going to talk about imposter syndrome in another professional development event, but I do think it particularly is an issue for interdisciplinary people who kind of feel like they have their feet in multiple areas. So how do you navigate a room in which you feel everyone else is more qualified than you?
I will say as a student, like, yeah, there's tons of times you're in a room with a bunch of professors and postdocs and whatever, and they're like talking about all this stuff, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on right now. Sometimes you just kind of have to take a deep breath and just admit it to it. Like, don't just sit there in silence and just be like, maybe if I just stay silent, like no one will notice that I have no idea what's going on. Like, I will frequently just when people are checking in, like, does everyone understand? I'll be like, no, I have no idea what's going on. So it's just like you're in a room with people who are experts. Like, I would say take advantage of it, because like I found most times when I was just be like, hey, I don't understand, can you explain this or whatever, I have found most of the times like people are happy to explain it. I haven't really gotten any backlash from doing that. And I feel like that a lot of times when people are explaining, it's like, unless you say something, they just assume you understand what's going on. And it will be
very
like
true, more
more detrimental later on when you clearly didn't understand and they're like, oh, but you haven't said anything to me. I thought you were good. So it's I would say just be upfront and just be like, hey, can you explain this to me? Because that's honestly the only way you're going to learn.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'll just add on something else I had to do. Since I worked a lot with different clinicians, people that have MDs, and they have a very particular way of describing people's conditions. Yeah, you're shaking your head, Kristin. So that yeah, it's hard to explain briefly, but so what I had to do is just read up honestly on it, and how to phrase what I need to phrase properly, so that I wouldn't get like, not chastised, but yeah, people like would kind of like correct me and like stuff like that. So kind of like take that as a learning experience, because then it's kind of learning a different language, right? And now you're able to navigate a room of clinicians, even though yeah, it took some time, but now you can navigate that world. Now you can navigate a different world when you learn how to speak the lingo of a different place. So yeah, I'll be open to it, like Ayan said.
Oh, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I think, again, that humility part about, admitting that you don't know something that can really go a long way. And it's something that I wish I learned much sooner in my graduate career when I was a student. Because, again, I think it would have just saved me a lot of stress in the long run, just not being afraid to speak up if I didn't understand something. And even, excuse me, to my surprise, at that time, it's like, well, I'm thinking I'm the only one who doesn't understand something. But come to find out, when I raised the question about, hey, can you explain this to me? I didn't get it. Well, there was a multitude of other people who didn't understand as well. So I think the issue with me was sort of internalizing me not understanding as like a failure about not being the best graduate student I can possibly be. But however, many other students were going through that same struggle. And we also can't leave out the fact that, well, maybe the researcher just didn't explain it well enough for us to understand too. So I think there's many other variables that are at play here that are worth considering when you're feeling sort of anxious about being in a room with other professionals or PhDs or whatever it may be.
Yes, thank you all for that. I can't believe it. It's already time for the last question. This has been such a wonderful, fun discussion. I really appreciate you all sharing your insights and experiences with us. So the question that feels most appropriate to end on is, what advice would you give to your younger self? We have a lot of undergraduate students in the audience who are thinking about going to grad school. What do you wish you knew? What would you tell your younger self if you could? Final question.
For me, at least, this feels like a very vulnerable question to answer because it's like I'm stuck between, do I want to be completely honest or do I just want to give a sufficient answer? So I think the safest answer for me would be after finishing my undergrad, I would have taken a gap year. I think, coming from community college where I felt like I was a little bit behind compared to my peers, I just wanted to go straight from undergrad to graduate school and then find a PhD program and then now to where I'm at now. But in retrospect, I would have taken that gap year between my undergraduate and graduate experience to really reflect on what it is I want to do, what it is I like. I would have sought mentorship from people I trust, whether that's friends, parents, spiritual advisor, whatever it may be, because I think knowing yourself is arguably the most important thing you can take with yourself going forward. That really supersedes, I think, any other component to your career, whether you're working at a job or even school. I think going into graduate school with a more confident sense of self about who you are and who you're not will definitely bode well in the long run for who you are and what opportunities you want and want to turn down sort of going forward. So that would be my best advice I would give my undergraduate self.
Thank you.
That's good advice. Before I give my advice, there was something I wanted to say, but I forgot to say it. I think something else that helps. I think something else that helps with like doing interdisciplinary work in graduate school is having a graduate fellowship that's external because you have a lot more freedom research-wise. So I have one, and I think you have one too, right? Yeah, we both have NSF, or well, I mean, I graduated, but I had NSF GFRP, so that like allowed me to kind of have a little bit more freedom and not necessarily be stuck to my advisor's grants. So just a plug for that. Definitely apply. And so to my advice, I think for my advice, I would tell myself to establish like good habits early on. So like I have a tendency to just like put my all into school and then like forget like everything else. Like something that was important to me was like cooking, like keeping like, good like eating schedule and stuff like that. And that was something that definitely fell off like towards my later years of graduate school. I mean, I was doing a lot, like admittedly. So I like got married, I got my PhD, I got my master's in like a course of like 6 months. So like I did a lot of stuff. And so my schedule just went like all over the place. And like I'm still like even now just trying to figure out, my way back to having a somewhat of a schedule. And COVID also didn't help that since like the work home lines got blurred. But that'll be my advice to myself.
I got similar advice during graduate school, if I can chime in quickly. My therapist said to me, the hour you take to go to the gym will make you so much more productive the rest of the hours that you're in lab. That one extra hour in lab isn't going to be what makes or break, but if you use that hour in a way to recharge, and I don't use self-care flippantly, but like literally take care of yourself so that when you are in lab, you're focused and productive. That took me a couple of years in graduate school to learn. So I'm right there with you with the importance of cooking and sleeping and all the things that make us healthy and able to come do the research.
Yeah, I think my advice to my younger self is pretty much what all of you pretty much touched on, was the fact that it's just like, calm down, it all works out. It all magically works out. And also just do, like, I know as an undergrad, like you want to do your best and you're like super focused on school, but like your mental health, your physical health, like those are really, really important. And like you need to sustain those things in order to do well. And also advice is just like, don't sacrifice the things that you like to do just to be like better at school. Like the hobbies that you enjoy, the things like spending time with friends or whatever, it's like those experiences are important and like will make you happy. And I think it will ultimately make you a better researcher, because it'll like, if you're happier, you'll do better at what you're doing. So I think like don't sacrifice your own happiness for the sake of like school or research.
Academic training is a long time to sacrifice your happiness. You certainly don't want to do that. You're right. Being happier outside of lab will make you more productive in lab or in research. And thank you for highlighting the importance of mental health, physical health. We all care so deeply about our research, but we need to care deeply about our own well-being as well. And with that, I think I'm supposed to throw it back to Dr. Astorini now.
Thank you, Dr. Webster, for moderating, and thank you to our distinguished panel of guests for sharing your candid and personal journeys, finding your scholarly identity. Such an important discussion. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Next week, the Wednesday workshop will focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and panelists will discuss the importance of securing and promoting inclusivity in research. Thank you, everybody. Have a productive week, and we will see you next time. Thank you.